Are we listening to a cello, a piano, electric guitar? Actually, we've been listening to compressed data. We've been listening to binary digit codes played on digital recording of sounds. It almost makes it mythical that we're listening to something completely far removed from our experience of an acoustic reality. When you're taking an analog recording, whether it's from a master tape or an LP, and it's converted into an MP3, there's a process of simplifying it. You are in fact compressing some of those details into something that's managed into binary code. When compression happens, much of the original data locked in the analog world is somewhat lost, it's somewhat distorted, and creates, on the one hand, a certain loss of fidelity. Artifacting becomes one of the consequences of that process of transfer. On the other hand, that distortion may also be helpful for someone who might be thinking, I'd like to use what I have on an MP3 as creative resource and create possibilities that may take place that would help me construct my own compositional response. Decompression is then the process of opening out to real life what compression and artifacting sort of compressed in a way that enables real sound to be heard. Now, if we think of data compression, not just as fact, but as metaphor, we realize that all music, when it starts with a composer and ends up in our domain for readership, is compressed, artifacted, and decompressed. A composer has this thought. He expresses it, or she expresses it on score in a code that is understood, called the musical score. That is translated by a performer, it's decompressed, but even in that process, sometimes the lines don't tell you exactly what is intended. That musical code is then translated into sound by a performer. That sound is given resound, it is made ready for an audience. An audience, of course, listens to the huge amount of sound. And almost at the beginning, when we are moved by music, we listen to something that has represented layers and levels of transformation from compression to artifacting to decompression. Artifacting as a metaphor speaks to the human experience. None of us are exact copies of one another. There are experiences which we draw from one another, which we owe to one another, because it goes through a process of our own before we churn out ideas and before we take on board experiences that reflect us in that learning process and that process of experiencing. Now, this is interesting. There's something about it I can't quite explain. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's a way in which this speaks to me. This line here that says, "Pay attention to me," is the one segment in there that's caught my attention. Because I can think of 100 ways in which I might think, okay, I want to use this. I could use it as a sample. I could use it as a loop. I could use this as a way in which I could reconstruct my own ways of writing music by using this sample. What I'm doing now is I'm taking a component part in there and artifacting it in such a way that I'm going to take this small fragment and I'm going to turn it into something which I could call my own, but still relying on something that was there in the Bach-Brandenburg third movement. What has also changed in the way in which compression has taken place in the 21st century is something that we take for granted. Bach wrote for very good musicians. If you are going to deliver a hip-hop album and you're going to have to find very good musicians, they will be very expensive, They will be very hard to find and you'll have to find a way to rehearse them. Compression then enables pieces of music, parts of music, little segments that make sense to this creative artist, whether it's Bach or whether it's a hip-hop artist, to take some of these ideas, to rearrange them, to permutate them differently. You have a technological affordance, you have a laptop, you have DJs, you've got things that can happen within an instant in order for you to deliver instantly. Music depends on artifacting. It is not possible to talk about new music without the process of artifacting. You think of these terms: compression, artifacting, decompressing. All of these metaphors are means by which we engage with music that we've experienced and allow us readership, whoever we are in the future, whether we become performers, we become composers, or we simply continue to remain readers. These are very powerful tools in the ways in which we are enabled and empowered and dignified by the process of readership. This educates us, this informs us. It allows us space to imagine. And what is beautiful about that experience is we may read differently from another. That's not the point. The point is we have found a way to trust our ears, to trust our senses, to trust our imagination, to give us this capacity and space to be able to read freely. Sound moves us, literally, physically, emotionally, psychologically. Why not read music on your terms?